via the internet for our service of worship here at Piedmont Presbyterian Church. Our Old Testament lesson today comes from the prophet Isaiah, the 40th chapter, verses 21 through 31. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught, and makes rulers of the earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth when heat blows upon them, and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name, because he is great in strength, mighty in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And then our gospel lesson for today, from the Gospel according to Mark, the very first chapter, verses 29 through 39. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered outside his door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place. And there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. May the Lord add his blessing to this reading of his holy word. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in God's sight. For God truly is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You know, this has been a pretty quiet winter so far. We've had our share of cold and rain and maybe even a little ice and snow, but nothing really of any consequence have we had to deal with. Occasionally, it's even been what I would term balmy out there. And everyone rushes outside and says, "Oh, spring is here." But we know better than that. There's not been a lot of news around either. Not a whole lot to talk about unless you're following the Republican nominees on the TV, and there's always something to talk about there. Compared to other years, I guess this winter has been kind of ordinary, maybe even a little flat. It's the same in the church year. Soon after the Christmas rush and all the color and gifts and the trees and the surprise of the Epiphany, liturgically we enter what is called ordinary time. The time between the excitement of Christmas and the intensity of Lent. And to mark this season, we use the color green. Green, the color of grass, which is pretty ordinary in itself. Yet at times we know that life can seem pretty ordinary, even dull, perhaps. Well, many of the folks that were living in and around Capernaum probably thought that too, until Jesus showed up. He brought excitement back into the area, and dull lives were transformed with the news of, or even the experience of Jesus teaching or healing or casting out of demons. Mark tells us about one action-packed day in Capernaum that began with Jesus teaching in the synagogue. While he was speaking, he was first heckled. Yes, heckled. They had them back then too. By a man who was possessed with an unclean spirit. Some would call it a demon. Now Jesus confronted this unclean spirit in the man, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the spirit did. People were surprised. They were standing around with their mouths hanging open. They were just astonished. Who was this that could have authority, even over a demon? And this man taught with authority too, as if he were a learned scholar, maybe even a scribe of the Jewish faith. News about Jesus spread around the area just like wildfire. Then Jesus goes out of the synagogue and he goes to the home of Andrew and Simon. Simon, whose mother was ill with a fever. Jesus spoke to her, touched her, healing her, and she got up and began to serve them. Of course, word of this miracle began to spread as well. Jesus is fast becoming known in the area as a wonder worker. And Mark says the crowd continued to bring their sick and their lame and their demon-possessed far into the night. What a day Jesus had. For those around Jesus, this day was anything but ordinary. But for him, it was just a typical day. An ordinary time doing all that he came to do. And look what else Mark tells us was ordinary for Jesus. After the busy day and the busy night, did he sleep in? No. Early in the morning, before it was even light, Jesus leaves the house and goes to find a place of solitude out in the open where he can be alone with God. For Jesus, this was not unusual. Over and over in the Gospels, we are told the same thing. Jesus goes somewhere alone to pray. But you know what was a part of the ordinary day for Jesus isn't so much for us. Time alone with God is something that unfortunately we rarely make the time for much anymore. If we are totally honest with ourselves, most of our meetings with God are not even planned. Our prayers are occasional, spur of the moment. And if we take time to meet with God, it's usually in an emergency or a crisis situation. Our backs are against the wall, the bills are due, the child is sick, there's too much work to do, or there's no work to do. We need help. Truth be told, we've tried everything else. Now we turn to God. It's not as if we don't have the time. Our leisure time over the last few decades has increased by almost 10%, 5 hours per week. But on average, Americans spend only, listen to this, most Americans spend only 9/10 of 1 hour, about 54 minutes, in doing worship activities every week. Compare this to the 15 hours a week that we usually spend watching TV on average. Although we have more time to do so, we spend less of it in prayer in our ordinary days. Jesus saw prayer as just the opposite. He was too busy not to stop and pray. You see, Jesus wasn't just a magician or some sort of wonder worker. And all of that authority and all of that power that Jesus showed, even his healing touch, he knew came from his constant connection with God. The Spirit within him that strengthened him and gave him the ability to do wondrous things. Jesus says in several of the Gospels, the Son can do nothing on his own. It is the Father who dwells in me who does his work. And yet no one understood that his power really came from his close relationship with God. And the essential part of that relationship was the time that he spent alone in prayer. He knew that it was not possible for him to accomplish all that he needed to accomplish in that ordinary day through his strength alone. He knew that if he was going to give so much of himself to others, he needed the strength and support and replenishment that he could get from God alone. For us, Jesus is a beautiful example of what spiritual practice of daily prayer can do for us. Jesus needed this time of communion with God for several important reasons, and so do we. Listen. First of all, Jesus knew that prayer would prepare him for his coming day, ready him for all the demands that would be placed upon him. When the alarm goes off, many of us hit the floor running, and then we hardly ever stop. We sort of go on autopilot throughout the day, not really taking the time to process what we do or plan ahead. Prayer helped Jesus be ready to respond to the people and the events that he came upon during his day. Like the one with the unclean spirit, prayer helped him prepare for situations like that to be able to respond in loving ways. Pastor Oswald Chambers has said, "It's not so true that prayer changes things as it is that prayer changes me, and I change things. God has so constituted things that prayer alters the way that I look at them." What a wonderful thing. Prayer prepared Jesus. And it can prepare us, too, to respond to the things that come along in our ordinary and not so ordinary days. Second, Jesus knew that prayer would provide him with the strength to meet the demands of whatever came his way. The ministry that Jesus was facing demanded so much from him that without prayer, he would soon have been burnt out. But as he spoke with his Father, he was energized. He was empowered to meet the physical and emotional demands that were placed upon him. Famous theologian Martin Luther, that we talked about this morning in Sunday school, once said, I have so much to do today that I will need to first spend 3 hours in prayer. Prayer strengthened Martin Luther. Prayer strengthened Jesus to meet his day. And it can help us also when we require God-given strength just to get through the demands that are placed upon us. Third, Jesus God's presence in his life daily in order to be discerning, to figure out what it was that God was asking of him each day. When the disciples found Jesus at prayer and they interrupted him, they only wanted Jesus to come back and do the same thing that he had done the day before. They wanted him to go back to the village and continue healing, continue casting out demons, being that wonder worker that they wanted him to be. That's what the people expected, but not what God really wanted. It was after this time of prayer that Jesus really announced his mission. He was not called to be wonder worker in one place like Capernaum, but he was to move on, town by town by town, spreading the good news that God's kingdom had come near in this man who was announcing the good news. He was proclaiming the gospel to all who would hear, and God's saving grace to the world. Prayer, you see, gave Jesus discernment and direction. We too can listen for God's words of direction for us and discern his will for us in our daily conversation. Jesus knew how much he depended on and needed these daily conversations with God. He needed all the help that frequent prayer can bring. What about us? Given the demands on our time and energy and resources that are even part of ordinary life, it is hard to find the time every day to set aside for prayer. But every day there are needs to be met, decisions to be made, business to be attended to. Every day there are difficult people to relate to, conflicts to be resolved, actions that require more than we in our strength alone can deliver. Our responses to even the ordinary demands of life are so much better when they come from within, from the reliance that we can have on the one who loves us and is always at work in us. When we learn this, then we can be prepared for whatever our day brings and answer the needs asked of us and follow the desires God has of us. A good modern model for us is Bertram Pollock. At one time, he was the Bishop of Norwich, England. Now, the life of a bishop, as you may well imagine, is a very busy one. People coming and going all the time, clamoring for attention, wanting situations resolved. Bishop Pollock had certain daily times that he set aside for prayer. And no matter who came to him at those times, they were told that he could not be interrupted because he had an appointment with God. Like Jesus, Pollock did not leave his meeting with God to chance. So let us covenant to have an appointment with God every single day. Yes, it takes discipline and it takes desire. The kind of desire that David expresses in Psalm 63. Oh God, you are my God. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. You see, prayer opens us up for the nourishment of God's water. Just as flowers and trees open up to the rain. Prayer has us stand before God almost as if we were empty pitchers and we are being filled from a fountain of living water. Surrendering all that we are to God, just as Jesus did, we can be able to say, like he did, the Father and I are one. This has been a pretty quiet winter, giving us the opportunity to work on these things that we have been avoiding or putting off or just forgetting about. Let's make this ordinary time a time for work on the holy work of prayer, to shape our faith, to work it deeper into our lives. Because like Martin Luther and like Jesus, we are really too busy not to. Amen.